She waited 7 years for the man she loved to return from war, but the Duke came home beside another woman. The first winter, Celestine Vale waited for Duke Alaric Ravenshire. She still believed love was simple. She believed promises meant something. She believed if two people truly loved each other, time could not destroy them. She would spend the next 7 years learning how dangerous those beliefs truly were. The snow fell heavily across Ravenshire Estate the night Alaric left for war. The entire courtyard glowed beneath torchlight, while soldiers prepared their horses. Servants rushed through the storm carrying supplies. Noble families gathered beneath the palace entrance, whispering anxiously, because nobody knew how long the war would last. Celestine stood near the frozen fountain, trying not to cry. She was only 19 then, still soft enough to believe the world rewarded loyalty. Almost everyone else had already gone inside because the cold had become unbearable. But she stayed because Alaric had not left yet, and she refused to let his final memory of her be tears. Then finally he appeared. Duke Alaric Ravenshire descended the palace steps dressed in black military uniform with silver embroidery across his chest. Snow clung lightly to his dark hair. His expression remained calm for the sake of everyone watching. But Celestine noticed the truth immediately. He looked afraid, not of dying, of leaving her. That was the strange thing about love. Real love teaches people each other's silences long before words. He crossed the courtyard quickly, stopping directly in front of her. For a moment, neither spoke. The storm howled softly around them while torchlight flickered across his face. Then Alaric reached inside his coat, pulling out a small silver ring. "I wanted to wait until spring," he said quietly. "But I don't trust war to give people time." Celestine's breath caught. He slid the ring gently onto her finger. Her hands trembled instantly. "Alaric, listen to me." His voice softened.
No matter how long this war lasts, I will come back for you.
Tears burned behind her eyes despite her efforts. "You promise?" Something painful crossed his face because people leaving for war always understand promises differently than people staying behind. They know survival is never guaranteed. But still he nodded. "I swear it." Then he kissed her beside the frozen fountain while snow fell around them softly, and for one beautiful moment. The world felt kind again. Celestine would replay that moment in her mind for the next 7 years. The first year passed slowly. At first, letters arrived constantly, almost every week, always written in Alaric's uneven, hurried handwriting. He told her stories about distant cities. He described cold military camps and endless rainstorms. He asked about Ravenshire gardens in spring because he missed the smell of roses blooming outside the estate walls, and every letter ended the same way. "Wait for me." So she did. The second year became harder. The kingdom changed because war changes everything. Families lost sons. Noble houses lost fortunes. Black mourning cloth slowly appeared across cathedral pews during Sunday services. But Celestine continued waiting anyway. She attended royal gatherings wearing Alaric's silver ring openly, despite growing whispers behind her back. Some people called her romantic. Others called her foolish. By the third year, even her father began losing patience. "You cannot spend your entire youth waiting for ghosts," Lord Vale told her one evening during dinner. "Alaric may never return." Celestine looked down quietly. "He promised me he would." Her father sighed heavily. Men promise many things before war, but she refused to remove the ring. The fourth year changed her. The letters stopped arriving entirely. At first she blamed weather, then military delays, then politics. Months passed with nothing. No letters, no news, no confirmation he was even alive. The uncertainty became unbearable because grief at least gives people closure. Hope traps people somewhere crueler between faith and despair. Every morning Celestine still walked to the palace gates, hoping a messenger might appear. Every evening she returned disappointed. Servants began watching her sadly because everyone inside Ravenshire estate knew the truth before she did. Duke Alaric Ravenshire was probably dead, but Celestine refused to believe it. People often mistake loyalty for weakness because modern society worships moving on quickly. But psychologists have spoken for years about how emotional attachment actually works. Real attachment changes the nervous system itself. The body remembers people long after logic tells it to stop hoping. Celestine felt that truth every day. She still reached toward the empty side of the bed, half asleep. She still turned whenever someone laughed like him in crowded ballrooms. Love leaves echoes inside people, and sometimes those echoes become impossible to silence. By the 5th year, society became cruel about it. Noblewomen whispered openly during gatherings, "She's embarrassing herself. 7 years wasted. Even if he returns, he certainly won't return unchanged." That last whisper frightened Celestine most, because deep down she already understood it. War never gives people back exactly as they were. She had seen returning soldiers throughout the kingdom. Some woke screaming during storms. Others stared silently through conversations like part of them remained trapped elsewhere. Pain changes people, sometimes permanently. Still she waited. The 6th year nearly broke her. Her father arranged several marriage meetings without permission. Wealthy noblemen visited the Vale estate pretending interest in conversation while clearly evaluating her like property. Celestine hated every moment. One evening after another unbearable dinner, she removed Alaric's ring for the first time in years. She stared at it beside candlelight, while tears blurred her vision.
Maybe everyone else is right.
She whispered to herself. Maybe love eventually becomes humiliation. But the moment she tried placing the ring away inside her jewelry box, something inside her shattered. She realized removing it hurt more than keeping hope alive, so she put it back on. The 7th winter arrived colder than all the others. Snow buried the kingdom beneath endless white silence. Celestine had stopped attending most royal gatherings because she grew tired of pity. She spent most evenings alone inside Ravenshire's West Library, reading beside candlelight while storms raged outside. The loneliness there felt safer than public sympathy. Then one morning, everything changed. A servant burst through the library doors, breathless. "My lady." He struggled, catching breath. "The Duke has returned." The book slipped from Celestine's hands instantly. For several seconds, she could not move, could not breathe. After 7 years, after endless winters, after thousands of nights wondering if he was alive. Alaric had finally come home. The entire estate erupted into chaos. Servants rushed through hallways. Noble families arrived immediately, hoping to witness the Duke's return firsthand. Horse carriages flooded the snowy courtyard. Celestine stood frozen before her mirror while maids adjusted her dress with trembling hands. "You should smile," one maid whispered emotionally. "Your love story survived war." But strangely, fear had already begun growing inside Celestine's chest. Because sometimes when people wait too long for happiness, they stop trusting it. The moment finally came near sunset. A massive black carriage entered the estate courtyard surrounded by royal guards. Snow crunched beneath carriage wheels while servants hurried forward, opening the gates. The entire palace watched from windows above. Celestine descended the staircase slowly, barely feeling her own heartbeat. Then the carriage door opened. Almost immediately, she saw him, alive. Duke Alaric Ravenshire stepped down into the snow, taller than she remembered. Broader, too. A thin scar crossed one side of his face now. His expression remained unreadable, but his eyes looked older. War had lived inside them. And suddenly Celestine understood something painful. The boy who kissed her beside the fountain 7 years ago no longer existed. Then her entire world shattered, because another hand appeared inside the carriage, a woman's hand, delicate, elegant. A moment later, a beautiful aristocratic woman stepped out beside Alaric, wearing a dark green traveling cloak trimmed with silver fur. The courtyard fell silent instantly. Even the servants stopped moving. Celestine stared forward, unable to process what she was seeing. The woman stood close enough to Alaric that familiarity already existed between them. Not strangers, not acquaintances, something worse. Comfort. Then the woman gently touched Alaric's arm, and heartbreak finally arrived. The kind that enters quietly at first, before destroying everything inside. You. Celestine felt it physically. She could actually feel the moment 7 years of hope cracked apart inside her chest. Almost everyone in the courtyard immediately began whispering. Who is she? Did he marry abroad? After all these years? Alaric finally looked up toward the palace steps, and his eyes found Celestine instantly. For a brief second, emotion crossed his face. Regret, guilt, something painfully close to longing, but it disappeared almost immediately beneath exhaustion. Celestine waited for him to explain. She waited for him to smile, to run toward her, to say something, anything that would make this nightmare feel less real. But he did not move. The woman beside him noticed Celestine immediately, too. Her expression softened slightly with what looked dangerously close to sympathy. And somehow, that hurt even more. Because sympathy meant the woman already knew exactly who she was. Celestine's hands trembled violently at her sides. She suddenly remembered every cruel whisper from the past 7 years. Even if he returns, he won't return unchanged. Now she finally understood. The worst kind of heartbreak is not losing someone. The worst kind is watching them return different, and realizing the person you waited for no longer belongs to you. If your heart already aches for Celestine, subscribe to Candlelit Vows and comment below. Would you still stay after waiting 7 years, only to see the person you love return with someone else? That night, Ravenshire Estate felt colder than it had in years, not because of the snowstorm outside, but because heartbreak changes the temperature of every room it enters. Celestine stood silently inside her chambers, while maids carefully removed the pins from her hair. None of them dared speak openly. Every servant in the estate already knew what happened. The Duke had returned after 7 years beside another woman, and the entire kingdom would feast on the scandal by morning. One younger maid finally whispered softly, "My lady, should I prepare tea?" Celestine stared at her reflection without blinking. "No," her voice sounded distant, even to herself. The maid hesitated before quietly leaving the room alone. The moment the door closed, Celestine finally allowed herself to breathe shakily. She moved toward the window overlooking the courtyard below. Torches still burned outside as servants unloaded luggage from the royal carriages. And there he was, almost hidden beneath the snowfall. Although 7 years had changed him physically, she still recognized the way he stood whenever he carried emotional weight. Shoulders tense, hands clasped behind his back, silence surrounding him like armor. Then the woman stepped beside him again. She said something softly. Celestine watched Alaric's expression loosen slightly afterward. Not fully, a small thing, but enough to destroy her further, because that look once belonged only to her. She turned away immediately, unable to watch longer. People often believe heartbreak arrives loudly, dramatic screaming, broken objects, public tears. But real heartbreak usually arrives quietly. It sits beside you in silence while the rest of the world continues normally. That was what made it unbearable, no matter how shattered Celestine felt. Candles still burned outside. Snow still fell. Servants still moved through hallways. Life continued as though 7 years of devotion had not just collapsed inside her chest. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." The door opened slowly. Almost immediately, her entire body tensed. Although 7 years had passed, she still recognized his footsteps before seeing him. Duke Alaric Ravenshire stood near the doorway, dressed now in dark evening clothes instead of military uniform. His scar looked sharper beneath candlelight. Up close, he appeared even more changed than before. Thinner somehow. Not physically, emotionally. As though war carved pieces from him nobody could restore. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then finally, Alaric said quietly, "You look exactly the same." The words almost made her laugh because they were painfully untrue. She had spent 7 years becoming someone else too. "You don't," she answered softly. Silence settled between them. He looked toward the silver ring still resting on her finger. His expression shifted immediately, she noticed. He noticed she never stopped wearing it, and somehow that seemed to hurt him. "Celestine," he stepped closer slowly. "I know this isn't how you imagined tonight." Pain rose sharply inside her chest. "No," she whispered. "It isn't." Another silence. Then finally she forced herself to ask the question destroying her. "Who is she?" Alaric looked away first. That alone terrified her, because guilty people avoid eye contact when truth becomes dangerous. "Her name is Evelyn Laurent," he answered quietly. "She traveled with our military convoy during the final years of the war." Celestine frowned slightly. "Why?" "Her father was a physician." His voice remained controlled. "She worked beside the wounded." That answer explained nothing. Not really. So Celestine asked the question more directly this time. "Why did she come back with you?" For the first time, real tension crossed his face. He looked exhausted suddenly. "It's complicated." Heartbreak sharpened her voice instantly.
No. Loving someone for 7 years is complicated.
The words landed harder than she intended. Almost immediately, guilt crossed his face. But guilt did not heal anything. He moved toward the fireplace slowly, as though gathering thoughts. "There are things you don't understand yet." Celestine stared at him in disbelief. "Then explain them." He opened his mouth slightly, then stopped. And somehow his silence frightened her more than lies ever could. Because silence meant whatever truth existed was painful enough to bury. Finally, Alaric whispered, "I tried writing to you." Her entire expression changed. "What?" "For years." He looked toward her carefully now. "Hundreds of letters." Celestine felt her heartbeat stutter. "I stopped receiving them after the 3rd year." His jaw tightened instantly. I know. The room fell silent. She struggled, processing the words. You knew? Not at first. Pain darkened his eyes. Eventually, I realized someone was intercepting them. Shock spread slowly through her chest. Why would anyone do that? Alaric laughed bitterly without humor. Because powerful families treat love like strategy. Suddenly, memories resurfaced. Her father arranging unwanted marriage meetings. Constant pressure to remove the ring. The strange way he avoided conversations about Alaric during the later years. Fear crept into her stomach. My father? Alaric said nothing, but his silence confirmed enough. Celestine sat down slowly because her legs suddenly felt weak. 7 years. 7 years believing he stopped writing. 7 years grieving abandonment, while somewhere across battlefields, Alaric still searched for her through letters she never received. Tears burned behind her eyes immediately. Why didn't you come sooner? She whispered finally. That question visibly wounded him. He looked toward the fire instead of her. Because war does not release people easily. His voice sounded hollow suddenly. There were winters I thought I would never leave alive. For the first time since his return, Celestine truly looked at him. Not the scar, not the changed expression. She looked deeper, and suddenly she noticed it. The exhaustion beneath everything. The way loud sounds outside the window made his shoulders tense slightly. The way his eyes scanned every doorway automatically, even during conversation. She had seen returning soldiers behave similarly before. Men who physically survived war but emotionally never escaped it. Real trauma changes the nervous system itself. Modern studies about wartime psychology describe how survivors often return emotionally disconnected, hyper-alert, unable to feel safe even inside peaceful environments. And suddenly Celestine understood why Alaric seemed distant. He was still surviving something internally. Then quietly she asked, "Did you love her?" The question froze him completely. For several seconds only the fire crackled between them. Finally he answered carefully, "Not the way I loved you." The sentence should have comforted her. Instead it somehow hurt worse, because not the same way still meant something existed. Celestine looked down, trying to steady herself. That isn't an answer. Alaric closed his eyes briefly. I know. Before either could continue, another knock interrupted them. A servant entered nervously. Your Grace, the royal families are requesting your presence downstairs. Of course they were. The kingdom had waited 7 years for this reunion. Now society wanted entertainment. Almost immediately, Alaric's entire expression hardened again. Emotional walls rising back into place. Tell them I'll come shortly. Servant bowed quickly before leaving. Celestine watched the transformation happen in real time. One moment vulnerable, the next emotionally unreachable again. War truly had changed him. Then quietly, she asked one final question before he left. Did you ever think about me? The question stopped him near the doorway. He turned slowly, and for the first time since returning home, real emotion finally cracked through his composure. Every day, the honesty in his voice nearly broke her completely. Then he left. The grand ballroom downstairs overflowed with nobles by midnight. Music played softly while candlelight reflected across crystal chandeliers. But beneath the elegance lived tension. Every conversation eventually circled back toward the same question. Who was the woman beside Duke Alaric Ravenshire? Celestine entered the ballroom wearing dark blue silk instead of brighter colors tonight. She no longer felt like pretending happiness. The whispers started instantly. There she is. Poor thing. 7 years wasted. She ignored everything gracefully because noble women learn early how to survive humiliation elegantly. Then she saw them. Although dozens of people surrounded Alaric, his attention remained strangely fixed on the woman beside him, Evelyne Laurent. She was undeniably beautiful. Golden brown hair, soft, intelligent eyes, elegant posture. The kind of woman society naturally admired. But what unsettled Celestine most was not her beauty. It was her calmness. Evelyn did not behave like someone trying to steal attention. She moved quietly through conversations, almost cautiously, as though she understood exactly how painful her presence already was. Then unexpectedly, their eyes met across the ballroom. For one strange moment, neither looked away. Celestine expected arrogance, pity, triumph. Instead, Evelyn's expression carried sadness, and somehow that frightened Celestine more than cruelty would have, because sad people carry secrets. Shortly afterward, the orchestra began playing a slow waltz. Immediately, noble daughters crowded closer toward Alaric, hopeful for attention. After 7 years at war, the Duke of Ravenshire had returned more powerful than ever, and powerful men rarely remain unmarried long. Celestine watched silently from beside the ballroom columns, while women practically competed for his gaze. Then Alaric suddenly looked directly toward her. The room seemed to disappear for one dangerous second. He started moving toward her slowly. Whispers spread instantly across the ballroom because everyone noticed. But before he reached her, another nobleman stepped forward first. Lord Adrian Beaumont, Lady Celestine. He bowed politely. "May I have this dance?" The timing felt intentional. She knew it immediately. Adrian had pursued her unsuccessfully for years. Her father openly approved of him, and tonight of all nights. He suddenly appeared beside her, offering rescue from humiliation. Celestine almost refused. Then she saw Alaric stop walking. His expression changed subtly, emotion tightening behind controlled silence. And suddenly part of her wanted him to feel even a fraction of the jealousy currently destroying her. "Yes," she answered softly. Adrian smiled immediately, leading her toward the ballroom center. The orchestra swelled around them, while hundreds of eyes followed closely. Celestine danced mechanically at first, but halfway through the waltz, she accidentally looked toward Alaric again. Big mistake, because he was already watching her intensely, and beside him. Evelyn noticed too. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Adrian leaned closer during the dance. "You deserve better than this," Celestine stiffened slightly. "Excuse me? Waiting 7 years only to be embarrassed publicly." His voice lowered. The Duke clearly returned, changed. Pain flickered through her chest. But before she could respond, another voice interrupted coldly. "Enough!" Adrian immediately stopped dancing. Almost the entire ballroom fell silent because Duke Alaric Ravenshire himself now stood directly beside them. His eyes remained fixed on Adrian. "The dance is over." Tension spread instantly. Adrian frowned. "I believe that decision belongs to Lady Celestine." Alaric's jaw tightened visibly. "Then ask her." The entire ballroom watched breathlessly. Celestine's heart pounded violently because beneath the anger, something else existed in Alaric's expression. Something dangerously close to jealousy. And after 7 years of waiting, that tiny spark of emotion felt powerful enough to destroy her all over again. If this story is already pulling your emotions apart, subscribe to Candlelit Vows and comment below. Do you think Alaric still truly loves Celestine? Or did war change his heart forever? The ballroom became so quiet, even the orchestra faltered for a moment. Celestine stood frozen between the two men, while hundreds of nobles watched with hungry curiosity. Because royal society loved romance almost as much as it loved humiliation. And tonight, it finally had both. Almost everyone expected Celestine to choose Alaric immediately. After all, she had waited 7 years for him. But heartbreak changes pride in dangerous ways. Celestine looked directly into Alaric's eyes, and for the first time since his return, she saw uncertainty there. Real uncertainty, the kind powerful men rarely reveal publicly. Then quietly she answered, "I would like to continue the dance." The words struck harder than a slap. Adrian immediately guided her back toward the ballroom center while whispers exploded around them. Celestine could physically feel Alaric watching her the entire time. She hated that part of her, enjoyed it. Because after days of feeling abandoned and humiliated, his jealousy felt like proof that she still mattered to him. And that tiny satisfaction terrified her. The orchestra resumed softly, but this time the dance felt different. Heavier, more dangerous. Adrian leaned closer. "You handled that beautifully." Celestine forced a polite smile. "Did I?" The Duke needed reminding that loyalty should not be taken for granted. Pain twisted sharply inside her chest, because despite everything, she still wanted Alaric to choose her willingly. Not because of guilt, not because of jealousy, not because another man threatened his pride. Real love cannot survive on emotional scraps. The dance finally ended several minutes later. Celestine immediately excused herself before more nobles trapped her in conversation. She moved quickly through palace corridors, trying to breathe properly again. But the moment she reached the west terrace overlooking the snowy gardens, she heard footsteps behind her. She did not need to turn around. She already knew you enjoyed that, Alaric said quietly. She faced the frozen gardens instead of him. Enjoyed what? Making me watch another man touch you. His voice remained controlled, but anger simmered beneath it. Celestine laughed softly without humor. Interesting. What is? She finally turned toward him. Her eyes glistened beneath candlelight. You disappear for 7 years beside another woman. And somehow I'm the one hurting you? The words visibly hit him. He looked away briefly before answering. You know it wasn't like that. No, she whispered painfully. I actually don't know anything anymore. Snow drifted softly around them while silence stretched between them. Then unexpectedly Alaric asked, Do you remember the winter festival before I left? The sudden question caught her off guard. Of course. How could she forget? That was the night they first danced together beside the frozen lake while fireworks lit the sky. She had been 17. He looked almost happy back then, almost untouched by darkness. You told me something that night, Alaric continued quietly. You said people only become strangers when they stop trying to understand each other. His eyes finally met hers again. I've spent the last 2 days realizing how badly I failed at that. Emotion tightened painfully inside her chest. Because part of her still recognized the man beneath the war, beneath the silence, beneath the distance. And that recognition felt dangerous. Then suddenly another voice interrupted behind them. Your Grace. Both turned. Evelyn Laurent stood near the terrace doorway wrapped in dark green velvet. Her expression immediately shifted after noticing the tension between them. I apologize, she said softly. I didn't realize. It's fine, Celestine interrupted quickly. She wanted escape more than conversation, but as she moved toward the doorway, Evelyn unexpectedly spoke again. Lady Celestine. Celestine paused reluctantly. Evelyn hesitated before saying quietly, I know my presence here has caused you pain. The honesty startled her. You don't owe me explanations. Perhaps not. Evelyn's eyes softened sadly. But I owe you truth. Alaric's expression changed instantly. Evelyn, she deserves honesty, Evelyn said firmly, though gently. Something unspoken passed between them then. A shared understanding. Celestine noticed immediately, and jealousy twisted sharply inside her stomach again. Evelyn turned back toward her. Your letters never stopped. The words froze the entire terrace. Celestine blinked slowly. What? Alaric wrote constantly. Evelyn stepped closer carefully. Even during the worst years of the war, her voice softened. Sometimes your name was the only thing keeping him alive. Emotion flickered painfully across Alaric's face because clearly this conversation was not supposed to happen tonight. Celestine struggled to breathe properly. Then why? Her voice cracked. Why did he come back like this? Silence. Then finally, Evelyn answered the question Alaric could not. Because war broke him, the terrace fell completely silent. Almost immediately, Alaric's entire posture hardened again. That's enough. But Evelyn ignored him. You waited 7 years for him. Her eyes remained fixed gently on Celestine. You deserve to know what those years did to him. Alaric stepped forward sharply. Evelyn, something dangerous moved behind his voice. Warning, shame, fear. But Evelyn continued anyway. There were nights he woke screaming because he thought enemy soldiers were still inside the camps. Celestine's heartbeat slowed painfully. Evelyn. Alaric's voice lowered dangerously. Stop. He stopped sleeping properly after the battle near Norhaven. Her expression darkened sadly. Most mornings he could barely recognize himself. Every word visibly wounded him. Celestine suddenly realized something awful. Although she spent 7 years grieving him, Alaric spent those same years surviving horrors she could not even imagine. Modern research surrounding wartime trauma describes how survivors often return emotionally detached, hypervigilant, unable to reconnect normally with the people they once loved. Many soldiers throughout history returned home physically alive, but emotionally stranded somewhere between past violence and present peace. And suddenly his distance made horrifying sense. Then Evelyn quietly revealed the final truth. The night Alaric nearly died, he asked me to promise something. Alaric closed his eyes briefly like a man already defeated. Evelyn. But she continued softly anyway. If he survived, I was to bring him home. Silence swallowed the terrace. Celestine stared between them, slowly processing the words. You weren't No. Evelyn shook her head gently. I never loved him romantically. Relief hit Celestine so quickly it almost hurt, but confusion immediately followed. Then why did everyone think? Evelyn gave a small, sad smile. Because people prefer scandal to complicated truth. That sentence lingered heavily between them because it was painfully accurate. Royal society always transformed emotional complexity into gossip easier to consume. Almost immediately, guilt crashed through Celestine. She remembered the jealousy, the assumptions, the heartbreak, and all along, Evelyn had not been stealing Alaric. She had been helping him survive. Then suddenly another realization struck her. You saved his life. Evelyn looked away quietly. Many people saved each other during the war. But Alaric's expression shifted painfully, because clearly the truth went deeper than that. Celestine noticed immediately. What happened at Norhaven? For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then finally, Alaric answered himself. Everything. His voice sounded hollow now. We lost nearly half the battalion overnight. Snow continued falling softly around them while memories clearly dragged him somewhere darker. The camp was attacked before sunrise. His jaw tightened. Most of the men never even woke up in time to defend themselves. Celestine watched his hands carefully. They trembled slightly. He noticed too immediately, clenching them tighter. Afterward, he swallowed hard. I stopped feeling like the same person who left Ravenshire. The honesty in his voice nearly broke her heart, because now she finally understood something devastating. She had spent 7 years mourning the possibility of losing him, but Alaric had spent those same years slowly losing himself. Then quietly he admitted the truth he probably feared most.
When I finally came home, part of me was terrified you would look at me and realize the man you loved never returned.
Oh no.
Tears filled Celestine's eyes instantly, because beneath all the confusion, beneath all the pain, he still cared what she thought of him. That realization mattered more than she wanted it to. Then, unexpectedly, Evelyn stepped backward toward the doorway. I think this conversation belongs to the two of you now. Before either could respond, she disappeared quietly inside the palace again, leaving silence behind. Almost immediately, Alaric looked exhausted. I didn't want you seeing me like this, Celestine frowned softly. Like what? His laugh carried no humor. Broken. The word hit painfully, because society teaches men, especially powerful men, to hide suffering rather than survive it. But trauma hidden too long eventually poisons everything around it. She stepped closer carefully. Alaric. He looked away toward the snowy gardens. You waited for someone who no longer exists. The sadness in his voice felt unbearable. Celestine studied him quietly, then softly whispered, No. He finally looked at her again, and for the first time in 7 years, she saw something fragile beneath the walls, beneath the war, beneath the silence. Hope. You came back changed, she admitted, but so did I. Snow drifted between them softly, then somewhere deep inside Ravenshire Estate. Midnight bells began ringing, and suddenly the 7 years between them no longer felt impossible. They simply felt painful. If your heart is completely invested in Celestine and Alaric already, subscribe to Candlelit Vows and comment below. Do you think love can survive when war changes someone completely? Or are some people impossible to come home from? For the first time since Alaric returned to Ravenshire Estate, Celestine allowed herself hope, and hope terrified her. Because heartbreak teaches people dangerous lessons. After enough disappointment, happiness begins to feel suspicious. That was why the days following the terrace conversation felt strangely fragile, almost delicate, like one wrong word could destroy everything again. Although the kingdom still whispered endlessly about the Duke and the mysterious woman beside him, something had shifted quietly between Celestine and Alaric now. Not peace, not forgiveness, something more dangerous. Understanding. He began seeking her out naturally after that. Some mornings she found him already standing beside the frozen gardens while snow covered the estate in pale silver. Other evenings they sat silently inside the West Library, reading beside candlelight without speaking much at all. But strangely, the silence no longer hurt. Real love often reveals itself not through dramatic confessions but through emotional safety. The ability to exist beside someone without pretending. That was what slowly returned between them. And somehow, It frightened Celestine more than distance ever did, because loving him again meant risking destruction again. One evening, they walked together beside the frozen lake, while servants lit lanterns throughout the estate. The snowfall had softened into tiny drifting flakes that glowed beneath evening light, almost peacefully beautiful. "Do you remember when you fell into this lake?" Alaric asked suddenly. Celestine laughed despite herself. "You pushed me. You were trying to skate across dangerous ice, and you were arrogant enough to believe you could rescue me alone." For the first time since returning home, Alaric actually smiled properly, not the restrained, exhausted expression he wore constantly recently. A real smile. And the sight nearly broke her heart, because she realized how deeply she missed it. He noticed her staring. "What?" Celestine looked away quickly. "Nothing, but the truth was painful." She had spent 7 years preserving memories of him so carefully that seeing pieces of the old Alaric return felt overwhelming. Then unexpectedly he spoke again. "I hated every winter without you." Her chest tightened. "Why?" Alaric stared across the frozen lake quietly. "Because winter was yours." The softness in his voice made breathing difficult. He continued before she could respond. "Every snowfall reminded me of Ravenshire." His eyes lowered slightly. "Of you waiting beside the palace gates." Tears burned behind her eyes instantly. Because despite everything, despite war, despite silence, despite heartbreak, he remembered her too. Then suddenly footsteps interrupted them. Arthur approached quickly across the snow, looking unusually tense. "Your Grace." Alaric immediately straightened. "What happened?" Arthur hesitated, glancing briefly toward Celestine. The royal council arrived unexpectedly. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Almost immediately, Alaric's expression hardened again. "Why?" Arthur swallowed carefully. "There are rumors spreading throughout the kingdom." Celestine's stomach tightened, because royal rumors rarely arrived harmlessly. Almost always they destroyed someone. Almost always a woman. "What rumors?" Alaric asked coldly. Arthur looked uncomfortable. "That your Grace intends to announce an engagement." Silence spread sharply through the frozen air. Celestine stopped breathing. "To Evelyn Laurent." The world suddenly felt very quiet, although part of her already knew society would eventually assume such things. Hearing the words aloud still hurt. She looked toward Alaric, automatically expecting immediate denial, but instead, he remained silent, and that silence shattered everything again. Celestine stepped backward slowly. Her voice barely existed. "You knew." Alaric frowned immediately. "Celestine, you knew this was spreading." Pain cracked through her voice now. "And you said nothing?" "Because it isn't true." "Then why does the council believe it?" For several seconds he said nothing again. "Big mistake. Because heartbreak makes silence sound like confession." Celestine's chest tightened violently. "Oh my God." She looked at him like someone seeing danger too late. "There is something you're not telling me." "It's complicated." The exact same answer from before. And suddenly rage mixed with heartbreak inside her chest, because she was tired of complicated, tired of secrets, tired of waiting for truths other people controlled. No. Tears filled her eyes instantly. 7 years was complicated. Her voice shook. Loving someone who kept disappearing from me was complicated. Snow drifted softly between them while Alaric struggled for words. "Celestine, listen to me. I am done listening to half-truths." The pain on his face became immediate. But she could not stop now, because years of loneliness were finally breaking open. "Do you know what the cruelest part is?" she whispered. even after seeing you return beside another woman. I still wanted it to be you." Emotion cracked visibly through his composure, but she continued anyway. "I defended you to myself every single night." Tears spilled freely now. "I told myself war must have changed things. I told myself love like ours doesn't disappear." Her voice broke completely. "And now I feel foolish all over again." Then she turned and walked away before he could stop her. That night, Celestine packed quietly. She did not cry this time. Strangely, numbness hurt worse. Her maid watched anxiously while folding dresses into travel trunks. "My lady, are you truly leaving?" Celestine stared blankly at the silver ring still resting on her finger. "I should have left years ago." Outside her chambers, whispers spread rapidly throughout the estate, because servants always sensed heartbreak before nobles did. By midnight, almost everyone inside Ravenshire Palace knew Lady Celestine Vale intended to leave by morning. Alone. Although the kingdom viewed her as tragic romantic entertainment, nobody understood the true exhaustion beneath loyalty. Waiting for someone emotionally consumes people little by little. Eventually, you stop recognizing yourself outside the waiting. That was what terrified Celestine most. She no longer knew who she was without loving Alaric Ravenshire. A soft knock interrupted the silence. "Come in," she whispered quietly. But the moment the door opened, her breath caught. Although she expected Alaric standing there instead, it was Evelyn Laurent. Evelyn stepped inside, slowly holding something wrapped carefully in dark cloth. "I know you probably don't wish to see me tonight," she said gently. "But before you leave, there's something you deserve to have." Celestine frowned slightly. "What is it?" Without answering immediately, Evelyn carefully placed the bundle onto the table, then slowly unfolded the cloth. Celestine froze. The entire table overflowed with letters. Hundreds of them, worn from travel. Snow damage, water stains, some sealed, others partially torn. Her hands began trembling instantly. "What?" Evelyn's expression softened sadly. "These are yours." The room tilted painfully around Celestine. She moved closer, slowly, almost afraid to touch them. Then she recognized the handwriting. Almost immediately, tears blurred her vision. Although years had passed, she would have recognized Alaric's writing anywhere. He wrote all these? Her voice barely existed. Evelyn nodded quietly. Every month, sometimes every week. Celestine stared at the enormous stack in disbelief. Hundreds of letters. Hundreds. She suddenly realized something devastating. Although she spent 7 years believing silence meant abandonment, somewhere across battlefields, Alaric never stopped reaching for her. "Why didn't they arrive?" she whispered. Evelyn hesitated carefully. Many were intercepted. Pain darkened her eyes. Others were deliberately hidden before reaching Ravenshire. Celestine immediately understood. Her father. The realization sickened her. Evelyn gently picked up one damaged envelope. This one was found beside Alaric after Norhaven. Celestine's hands shook violently, accepting it. The paper was stained dark in one corner. She realized slowly with horror. It was blood. Almost immediately, tears began falling harder. Evelyn spoke softly. "He nearly died protecting these." The room fell completely silent. Celestine opened the fragile letter carefully. His handwriting looked rushed, uneven, desperate. "If this reaches you, then somehow I survived another winter without home. I keep imagining your face beside the frozen fountain where I promised to return. Some nights the memory of you is the only thing stronger than fear." Her breathing became uneven instantly. She opened another letter. The war keeps taking pieces from people. I pray constantly it does not take the parts of me that belong to you. Another. I dreamed of Ravenshire again last night. You were standing in snowfall wearing blue silk. I woke angry at morning for stealing you away. By the fifth letter she could barely see through tears, because every page carried the same truth. Although war changed him, Alaric never stopped loving her. Then suddenly she noticed something else. Dates. The letters continued even after his return to the kingdom. Her heartbeat slowed painfully. She opened one written only weeks ago. I stood outside your window tonight like a coward because after 7 years, I no longer know how to return to someone who loved me before war ruined everything. Tears slipped down her face silently now. Evelyn watched carefully before speaking. Do you understand now? Celestine looked up slowly. Understand what? Evelyn's expression softened deeply. He didn't bring me home because he loved me. Her eyes lowered sadly. He brought me because he no longer believed he deserved you. That sentence shattered something inside Celestine completely. Because suddenly every silence, every hesitation, every distance made horrifying sense. Although she spent 7 years fearing he stopped loving her, Alaric spent those same years believing war made him impossible to love. Then another realization struck her sharply. The engagement rumors. Evelyn nodded slowly. The royal council wants the marriage. Pain flickered briefly across her face. My family's influence would strengthen Ravenshire politically after the war. Celestine stared at her, stunned. But you don't want that. Evelyn laughed softly without humor. No, then more quietly, she admitted. And neither does he. The room fell silent again. Celestine looked back down toward the letters spread across the table. Hundreds of pages, hundreds of attempts to return to her. And suddenly she understood something painful. Love had never truly disappeared between them. Fear had simply buried it beneath grief. If your heart is breaking all over again for Celestine and Alaric, subscribe to Candlelit Vows and comment below. Should Celestine fight for the man she waited 7 years to love, or walk away before he breaks her heart again? Celestine did not sleep at all that night. She sat beside candlelight surrounded by hundreds of Alaric's letters, while snowstorms battered Ravenshire estate outside. Some pages carried traces of mud from battlefields. Others smelled faintly of smoke. Many looked rewritten multiple times, as though he struggled desperately to find the right words. And every single one carried the same heartbreaking truth. He never stopped trying to come home to her. The realization changed everything. Because for 7 years, Celestine believed silence meant abandonment. But now she understood something far more tragic. Although Alaric survived the war physically, emotionally, he returned believing he was too broken to deserve love. That fear had shaped every terrible decision since his return. She reread one letter repeatedly until dawn. I worry constantly that if you saw the man I have become, you would mourn me while I still stood before you. The sentence destroyed her because suddenly she remembered every moment since his return. The emotional distance, the hesitation, the way he looked at her like someone starving beside food he no longer believed belonged to him. Then finally another truth settled painfully inside her chest. Although she spent 7 years waiting for him, Alaric had been waiting too. Waiting to feel human again, waiting to feel worthy of coming home. Morning arrived gray and cold across Ravenshire estate. Servants moved quietly through hallways because tension filled the palace like smoke. News of Celestine's planned departure had already spread through noble society, and now fresh rumors traveled even faster. The Royal Council intended to formally announce Duke Alaric Ravenshire's engagement to Evelyn Laurent during that evening's winter banquet. The kingdom practically celebrated already. Noble families loved politically advantageous marriages. And after 7 years of war, stability mattered more to them than love. But inside her chambers, Celestine stood before the mirror, slowly removing Alaric's silver ring from her finger for the first time in years. She stared at it, resting in her palm, while emotions twisted painfully inside her chest. "I can't keep surviving on hope alone anymore," she whispered quietly. Then she placed the ring carefully beside the letters. Her maid looked heartbroken, watching silently. "My lady," Celestine forced herself calm, "prepare the carriage." Meanwhile, downstairs, Alaric looked moments away from emotional collapse. Arthur followed him through the palace study while documents remained scattered across every table. "Your Grace, the council expects your decision tonight." Alaric barely looked up. "I know. And Lady Celestine intends to leave before sunset." That finally got his attention. Instant panic crossed his face. "What?" Arthur hesitated. The servants began packing her belongings before dawn. The room suddenly felt too small. Almost immediately, Alaric moved toward the doorway. But Arthur stopped him carefully. "Before you go after her, there's something else you should know." Alaric frowned impatiently. "What now?" Arthur slowly handed him a sealed document. "Your father arranged the intercepted letters." Silence swallowed the room. Although Alaric already suspected manipulation, hearing confirmation still felt brutal. He opened the document quickly. His expression darkened with every line. Witness accounts. Servant confessions. Payments authorized secretly through Ravenshire accounts. The late Duke himself had ordered the letters hidden years ago. Almost immediately, anger crashed through Alaric violently. "Why?" Arthur looked uncomfortable. "The former Duke believed the war would change you permanently." His voice lowered carefully. "He feared attachment would weaken your ability to lead Ravenshire afterward." Alaric laughed bitterly without humor. "So he destroyed her instead." Pain tightened visibly across his face because suddenly he understood the full horror of it. Celestine spent 7 years believing abandonment, while he spent 7 years believing she stopped loving him. And all along, powerful men manipulated both of them in the name of duty. That realization filled him with unbearable rage, not only toward his father, but toward himself, because fear had made him continue the damage even after returning home. Then suddenly another thought struck him. "Where is Evelyn?" Arthur swallowed carefully. Preparing for tonight's banquet, Alaric immediately understood, and horror crossed his face. Because if the council announced the engagement publicly before truth emerged, Celestine would leave forever. He moved instantly. "Cancel the banquet." Arthur blinked, surprised. "Your Grace?" "Now." His voice sharpened dangerously. "And prepare my horse." Across Ravenshire Estate, snow fell harder than ever by afternoon. Celestine's carriage waited outside the palace entrance while servants loaded luggage quietly. She wore dark traveling clothes now. Simple, elegant, emotionally exhausted. Almost the entire estate watched sadly from palace windows because everyone understood what this departure meant. The end of a love story that survived 7 years only to collapse after reunion. Celestine took one final look toward the frozen fountain in the courtyard, the exact place Alaric promised to return for her. The memory hurt differently now, not because he lied, But because both of them spent years trapped behind manipulations, neither fully understood. Then suddenly, hoofbeats thundered across the snow. The entire courtyard turned instantly. Almost moments later, Alaric rode through the palace gates at full speed, snow spraying violently beneath the horse. The sight alone startled everyone because dukes did not behave recklessly in public. But heartbreak destroys dignity quickly. He jumped from the horse before it fully stopped. Breathless. Snow clinging to dark hair, eyes filled with panic. Celestine froze beside the carriage door. The entire courtyard fell silent. "Don't leave." His voice cracked slightly. The vulnerability stunned everyone watching. Celestine stared at him, unable to speak properly, because after 7 years of emotional restraint, seeing Alaric unravel publicly felt almost unreal. He walked toward her slowly. "Please." The single word carried more honesty than anything else he had said since returning home. But pain still lingered sharply inside her chest. "The kingdom believes you're announcing another engagement tonight." His jaw tightened immediately. "I canceled it." Shock flickered across her face slightly. "What?" "There was never going to be an engagement." His voice lowered. "Not with Evelyn." He reached inside his coat, pulling out the silver ring she left behind upstairs. "Because despite everything," his breathing remained uneven, "you are still the only person I ever wanted beside me." Tears filled Celestine's eyes instantly, but fear remained too. "Then why keep pushing me away?" The question visibly wounded him. He looked down briefly before finally answering with complete honesty. "Because war taught me how easily people lose everything they love." His eyes lifted toward hers again, painfully vulnerable. "And after surviving that much death, I stopped believing someone like you could still love someone like me." The courtyard remained completely silent except for falling snow. Even the servants looked emotional now, because real love rarely reveals itself so honestly. Almost immediately, tears slipped down Celestine's face. "Alaric." He stepped closer carefully. "I know I failed you." His voice shook slightly. "I know fear made me cruel sometimes." Pain darkened his expression, but every letter was true. He held her gaze steadily now. Every winter, every battlefield, every prayer to survive. His chest rose sharply. "It was always you." The emotional honesty shattered whatever walls remained inside her. Because beneath the trauma, beneath the distance, beneath the confusion, she could finally see him clearly again. Not the Duke, not the war hero, just the man who spent 7 years trying desperately to return home. Then suddenly another voice interrupted softly behind them. Well, everyone turned. Eveline Laurent stood beneath the palace entrance, smiling faintly through the snowfall. This is considerably more romantic than politics. Several nobles nearby looked deeply confused. Almost immediately, Evelyn addressed the courtyard calmly. "For the sake of ending ridiculous kingdom gossip." Her eyes flickered toward Celestine warmly. "Duke Alaric Ravenshire has never belonged to me." Then gently she added, "He's been in love with one woman since he was 19. Whispers spread instantly throughout the courtyard. But this time they no longer mattered. Because for the first time in years, truth stood openly between them. Almost immediately, Alaric turned back toward Celestine again. His expression softened completely. "I don't expect forgiveness overnight." He swallowed hard. "But if there's still anything left between us, let me spend the rest of my life earning it." That sentence finally broke her completely. Because real love is not perfection. Real love is two wounded people choosing each other despite damage, despite fear, despite time. Then slowly, Celestine stepped toward him. The silver ring still rested in his trembling hand. She looked down at it quietly before whispering, "You know what the cruelest part of waiting 7 years was?" Alaric's voice lowered. "What?" Fresh tears slipped down her face. "Never knowing if you still remembered me." Emotion cracked visibly across his face instantly. He gently touched her cheek. "Celestine." His voice almost disappeared. "For 7 years, you were the only thing I refused to forget." And that was the moment she kissed him, not dramatically, not passionately. At first, just softly, like two people finally finding each other after surviving separate wars. The courtyard erupted quietly afterward. Servants crying, nobles whispering, some even smiling openly because despite society's cruelty, people still desperately wanted to believe love could survive impossible things. Although snowstorm winds howled around Ravenshire Estate, suddenly the world no longer felt cold. Later that evening, Alaric brought Celestine to the small candlelit chapel hidden behind the palace gardens. The same chapel where his mother once prayed during harsh winters. Candlelight glowed softly across ancient stone walls while snowfall drifted beyond stained glass windows. They stood alone together finally, without politics, without gossip, without fear. Almost peacefully quiet. Almost home. Then, slowly, Alaric knelt before her once again. Her breath caught instantly. He opened a small velvet box, revealing a new ring. This one simpler than before, but somehow more beautiful, because it carried truth instead of promises made before war. 7 years ago, he whispered emotionally, I asked you to wait for me. His eyes filled with painful honesty. I think now I understand how unfair that was. Tears filled Celestine's eyes immediately. He continued softly, So this time, I'm not asking you to wait. His voice shook slightly. I'm asking if you'll finally come home with me. The candlelight flickered softly around them while snow covered the chapel windows. And suddenly every lonely winter, every intercepted letter, every heartbreak, every year apart, felt unbearably worth surviving because love had finally returned, not untouched, not perfect, but real. Celestine laughed through tears before whispering the answer that healed them both. Yes, outside Ravenshire Estate, winter storms continued across the kingdom. But inside the candlelit chapel, spring had finally arrived. Thank you for listening to tonight's story on Candlelit Vows. If this story touched your heart, subscribe, like, and comment your favorite moment below. And remember, sometimes the people who return changed are still carrying the same love home inside.
If you've made it this far into the story, then you already